Welcome to the Canadian Business Quarterly podcast, where we speak with Canada's most influential industry leaders on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all of our content, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.
Today's guest is Taran Ghatrora, co-founder and CEO of Blume, a venture-backed self-care company focused on empowering girls through clean, period, and personal care products and sex education. She's driven by her passion for women's health and gender equality. Taran's also a 500 Startups Fellow, Top 30 Under 30, and G20 Youth Delegate for Canada. Taran, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you're one of the co-founders. Where did the inspiration for the business come from?
Yeah, so we started Blume because we surveyed our audience and 60% of women told us that they could pinpoint that their self-esteem plummeted when they went through puberty. And in addition to that, they had trouble finding safe and effective products for period care, as well as other symptoms of going through puberty, for everything from natural deodorant to acne treatment to face wash. It's a really tough time to go through for most people. And then when you add to that the lack of sex ed and the lack of safe and effective products really geared towards this life stage, we just were getting a resounding, overwhelmingly great feedback around this idea and these products. And so we actually collected data for over 2 years on what kinds of personal care products our audience cared about. And that was through a subscription box service. And then we launched the 4 products and we actually crowd created them with our customers. So that was where the inspiration came from. And then for the brand itself, we wanted it to be more than just products. It's actually a community as well as education, sex ed, and real women's stories.
So you started with a single product of organic tampons. What's the need for a manufactured product like tampons to be organic?
That's a great question. So what's interesting to understand is just the fact that pads and tampons are a space very different to most other spaces, in the sense that for a very long time, almost the last 100 years or so, there's only been 2 large brands manufacturing all of the mainstream pads and tampons. And those pads and tampons have a lack of transparency in ingredients, some questionable processes. They have bleaching processes in some cases. The cotton is grown with pesticides. And the thing about this space is that people haven't really talked about periods or period products as openly as they do in other spaces. So women were purchasing pads and tampons for a really long time as a rote behavior just to deal with it, and not necessarily asking their friends or providing recommendations like you would in any other buying behavior. And that's because society places so much taboo and stigma on periods, and it's something that's been silenced for so long. And in our opinion, and what we think at Blume, is that that's one of the big reasons for the lack of innovation in this space. So for us, the main reason to supply and provide organic pads and tampons as a choice is because we believe that people deserve to know what's in their products. They deserve to know that the products that are, in one of the most absorbent parts of their body are free of pesticides and bleach, and because women deserve choices in this space.
So you had mentioned you originally started doing this through a survey to find this information, but what kick-started that research? What was the idea behind exploring this initially and then turning it into a product and then a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So before the survey, actually, so this is how it started. I was in law school in the UK, and it was raining a lot. I didn't have a car, so I was ordering essentials to my house, mostly through Amazon, just groceries and things like that. And there were a lot of different subscription services on campus that we were being bombarded with, and I wasn't really signing up to any of them, but I was noticing that it was a bit harder for me to find the brands I used at home for a period product. And just in general, they were really overpriced on Amazon for some reason. So I thought, why is there a subscription for razors and bacon and snacks, all these things that aren't necessarily a monthly need, but not for pads and tampons? So that's when I called my sister up and I talked to her about it, and I was just procrastinating my legal homework and saying like, hey, maybe we should do something. And so she was on board right away. And then we proceeded to do research for writing blog articles and getting the website up. And that's when I really found out what was in mainstream pads and tampons. And we wanted to have organic pads and tampons available through our service. So that's how we actually started. And then the surveys came after that because we were doing a monthly delivery of organic pads and tampons across the US and Canada with other third-party wellness products. And that's because around the same time, we had noticed, both of us actually had shifted to clean beauty as well, like natural deodorant and skincare. And I had noticed my skin had cleared up for the first time in years. And so we were sharing all these different products that we would curate with our audience. So they'd get their pads and tampons every month plus 2 other gifts in the box. And that's where we did the surveys every single month to find out about, so we could give them more of what they wanted.
So for potential entrepreneurs who might be listening now, you're saying that you came out with the product and then you partnered or joint ventured with other companies to package this together to be able to create distribution? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it was almost more of a service where we were delivering people the products that they needed, kind of like Birchbox. And we weren't manufacturing our own at this point. And those companies looked at us as like marketing and advertising to reach their target consumer, although we were quite small, but that's how we were pitching it to them. And then they would be in the box. And so through that, we just learned so much. And the interesting thing about it, I think for other entrepreneurs listening, is that we always were solving the same problem. And over time, how we solved that problem is what evolved, but we stuck to the mission. So instead of being really like rigid and like creating this box delivery service, we continued to talk to our customers about how we could best solve this problem for them around their monthly period and their self-care.
Okay. And so you started out with the one product, which is the organic tampon. At what point did you decide to expand your product line, and what was that process like, going through that as a relatively new business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started with the pads and tampons, and like I said, we were collecting that data. And then I think it was about 1.5 years in of collecting the data and the information about the product when we really started to see patterns in the data about which products people did want. And so, for example, natural deodorant that's unscented, that was really hard for our audience to find, and one that actually worked. And so that would come up again and again. Same with an acne treatment that worked and didn't have benzoyl peroxide or salicylic acid and didn't make your skin peel and scar. So there's a number of patterns that kept coming up. And we actually took that feedback and then we dove even deeper into each of those products, and we got on the phone with customers. We sent them samples, and we then spent 8 months creating what are the 4 products we have now, which we launched in June of 2018.
So the company was originally bootstrapped. You mentioned you started this while you were in school, and you've since gone out and found venture capital to keep the business going and expanding. For entrepreneurs, this becomes a bit of a mysterious world. With all the programs like Shark Tank and Dragon's Den, the idea or the process of seeking funding is not really understood by a lot of people if I've got a business at home, who do I then call to get a cash injection? When you decided that you needed outside cash to grow the business, who introduced you to investors, and how did you find out that process, and what became the expectation on you to secure additional funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did start by bootstrapping for a really long time. We didn't even know that venture capital was an option or that it was even available. And so we bootstrapped, we recycled revenue. Over time, we found there was actually a really great angel investor in Vancouver we met at a student pitch competition who offered us our first check for $25,000. And that kept us going until we got accepted into 500 startups. And then 500 startups invested our first real kind of venture check of $100,000. And after that is when we became much more familiar with the venture world, how to raise money, and it's also when our business grew drastically. And then prior to the rebrand and the product launch, we raised a small round of $250,000, and that got us to over a $2 million run rate. And then at that point, which is just this past February, is when we raised a larger round of $3.3 million from venture capitalists.
And was that process hard? We speak with a lot of publicly listed companies, and sort of the demands and expectations on delivering shareholder value can be strenuous at some parts of time. How did you sort of explain it to, get the trust and the interest of investors?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. Only about 2% of venture capital goes to women, and even less than that to women of color. And so I think we are very fortunate to have raised the money that we did. I personally believe a lot of I think what made it easier is relationship building. Obviously, having traction and a growing and healthy business is first and foremost, and you need to have that. Our business is growing very rapidly, but sometimes you can have a great business and still not be able to raise money. That happens a lot, even if it's venture backable and scalable, because you have to also be able to pitch your business in a way that makes sense in the venture world. And it needs to make sense for you to even raise venture. Not every business should raise venture. And so for us, I think we built relationships over, I would say, at least 2.5 years, some of them longer, of folks that got to really watch our progress. We would ask them for help when we needed it without even considering that we'd raise from them in the future, in all honesty. So yeah, it was definitely very, very difficult. Just because raising money is a rigorous process. It's not easy. I mean, it takes time. It takes a lot of really refining your messaging, as well as knowing your numbers inside and out, where your business is going to be in a year, where it could be in 5 years, the bigger vision for the business, and then also being able to dive into the details. So there's a lot involved, but personally, I think relationship building is the most important thing. And in addition to that, running a real process when you're fundraising, and not just partially fundraising off the side of your desk, but actually doing it full time for a set period of time, and making it very clear when your fundraise closes and how much you're raising and where that's going to get you. And I think as simple as that is, not everybody runs their process that way.
So does that become a difficult balance when you're in the midst of fundraising to sort of be out there, spruiking for money and at the same time trying to run the business?
Absolutely. And that's one of the balances that I think is really important. So we started to prepare for our fundraise in December in the back end, and just made sure that everything was completely ready and prepared as much as we could. And we were on a good growth trajectory, which was nice. And then I have a co-founder, and I'm really lucky to have a wonderful co-founder who's able to hold down the fort. We actually moved into our fulfillment center. We had a pop-up in New York, and we did our fundraise all in February. So it was a little bit crazy, but we managed to pull it off, and we got great partners.
Excellent. You're based in Vancouver, but 90% of your business is in the U.S. Why is there such an enormous discrepancy between the two countries?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and a really interesting one that I think is important. We definitely spend as much attention, I would say, with both Canada and the U.S., but there's just more density in the States. That's one thing. So there's just more people, which is probably a big reason why we have more customers there. And then also shipping is a lot more convenient, and the infrastructure for shipping is more affordable and more quick. And so I think that's a big part of it for a lot of physical product companies like ours. They tend to scale better in the U.S.
Okay. And your background is in law and accounting, as you mentioned. What have you had to learn to move into the retail industry now that you're working in sanitary and beauty products?
Yeah, so my background is in law, and my co-founder's background is in accounting. So we have quite complementary skill sets. And so we handle different sides of the business. I would say there's obviously a ton we've had to learn, definitely when it comes to product, both digital and physical, and then also marketing. We learned most of it on the fly, and there's this really funny Y Combinator quote, I think it is, or maybe it's the lean startup, but where starting a company is kind of like jumping off a cliff and assembling the plane on the way down. And I think that's a lot of what it is. So the skills we had in our previous careers, some of them might be helpful, but a lot of what we're learning is through what we're just learning on the job, through mentors, and through our own research.
Okay. And, so Blume has a mission. What are the health issues that you're trying to create awareness of through the brand?
So what do you mean by that?
Well, I think when we were originally talking about, when we had the initial conversation, you were mentioning some things like in the U.S., only 24 states have mandated sexual health. I think as you were talking about as well, how you are overcoming some of the chemicals and hormones in, the major brands' products.
Yeah. Okay. So on the sex ed side, only 26 states mandate sex ed. And then in Ontario, up in Canada, they just reverted back to a pre-1993 sex ed curriculum. So that's super problematic and something that we want to help with, because so many people, girls and boys, are navigating this time of going through puberty without accurate information about their bodies. And oftentimes there's either information that's not completely factual, or they're not getting it in school, or it's too clinical and they're just not interested. So we're trying to be that go-to resource that can be relatable as well as medically accurate information as people go through puberty. And then on the product side of things, it's exactly what you mentioned. There are a lot of parabens and endocrine disruptors in products, like aluminum in deodorant, which can potentially cause breast cancer. There are a number of things in pads and tampons, like we discussed: bleach, dioxins, pesticides. And so we kind of try to tackle both those things through content and then products. And so with our products, they are all cruelty-free. They're vegan. Most of the ingredients are certified organic as well. And we are just very strongly invested in having transparency in our ingredients for our customers.
Okay. So where's the business at now, and what are your near-term goals?
Yeah, we're growing rapidly. We are mostly direct to consumer, but we're also in some retailers like Nordstrom's Clean Beauty Pop-Up, Urban Outfitters, Riley Rose Anthropology. So we're growing very quickly, and we're really focused on building the community and brand. So over the next 12 months or so, we'll be growing our team. We'll be creating a lot of educational content, and it's really just the beginning for us to become the brand that girls grow up with.
Awesome. Well, Taran, thanks for your time today, and all the best with Blume and the brand.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
This has been a production of the Canadian Business Quarterly, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Canadian Business Quarterly, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.